Her millionaire husband humiliated her, saying, "Without me, you'd be nothing," but she proved him wrong. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. The lights of the ballroom glittered like shattered diamonds, and in the center of it all stood Maya, quiet, composed. Her fingers wrapped around a crystal glass that trembled ever so slightly. The cameras flashed, laughter echoed, and beside her, Ethan, her husband, the man the world called a genius billionaire, smiled like he owned the air she breathed. "You see," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "without me, she'd be nothing." A few gasps, a few awkward chuckles. Maya's lips curved into the smallest of smiles, but her eyes told a different story. She raised her glass, the champagne catching the light. "You're right," she said softly, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. "I'd be nothing if I stayed where you wanted me to." The words hung in the air, thin as glass before it shatters. He blinked, the room freezing for half a second. Then the host laughed, the music resumed, and everyone pretended they hadn't just witnessed a woman being broken in public. Maya turned, her heels clicking against the marble as she walked out of the ballroom, the echo following her like a heartbeat. Outside, the night wind was cold, whipping through the hem of her satin dress. She could still hear his words. "Without me, you'd be nothing," like a bruise she couldn't cover. 3 years ago, she would have believed him. Back then, Maya Hart was a 3-year-old architecture student drowning in bills, holding 2 part-time jobs, and a fading hope that she could keep her mother's medical treatment going. That was when Ethan Cole appeared, a man who didn't ask, only offered a marriage contract disguised as salvation. 2 years, he'd said, sliding a document across a marble table. "You stay by my side, attend events, smile when cameras flash. In return, I'll pay for your mother's surgery, your tuition, everything." She remembered staring at the ink, the crisp edges of the paper, the reflection of his cold blue eyes in the glass of water beside it. "So this is love?" she'd asked quietly. He had looked at her like she was naive. "This is business," he'd replied, and she had signed. In the months that followed, the world saw them as a perfect couple, he, the self-made millionaire. She, the lucky girl who caught his attention. But behind the mansion walls, silence was louder than any argument. Ethan's world revolved around power meetings and control. Maya's revolved around survival and sketches she drew in secret, a small, leather-bound book where she designed houses she would never build. Sometimes, late at night, she'd glance across the room at the man who had saved her and wonder if she had sold her freedom too cheaply. And yet, every time she tried to speak, he'd cut her off with the same cold reminder, "Don't forget why you're here." So she stopped trying. Until tonight. Tonight, as the music played and the guests clinked their glasses, she realized something. The worst thing he could do wasn't to leave her. It was to make her forget who she was before him, and she refused to let that happen. She stepped into the parking lot, the city lights glowing in the distance like silent witnesses. The driver opened the door, but she waved him off. "No," she whispered, voice firm for the first time in months. "I'll walk." As her heels clicked against the wet pavement, her phone buzzed a message from an unknown number. It was a photo of her sketchbook, open on a conference table, her name signed in the corner. Beneath it, a single line, "You're more than you think." She froze, staring at it, the night spinning around her. Somewhere deep inside, a spark ignited. She didn't know who sent it yet, or how, but that message would be the beginning of everything she was about to become. The night after the gala, Maya sat alone in the small apartment she had rented downtown. It was barely 400 square feet, but for the first time in years, the air did not smell of his cologne or money. It smelled like freedom and dust. Her old sketchbook lay open on the coffee table, the pages filled with pencil drawings of buildings she had once dreamed of designing and faces she wished she could forget. She touched the corner of a page where his outline remained, drawn long before he had become cruel. The phone on the table buzzed again, that same unknown number. Another message appeared. "Keep going. The world needs what you build." She frowned. There was no signature, no hint of who it was. but it came right when she was about to give up, and somehow it steadied her hands. The next morning, she woke before sunrise, pulled her hair into a knot, and stepped into a world that no longer had Ethan's shadow hanging over it. She walked to a coffee shop that had a small, "Help Wanted" sign on the window. The manager looked skeptical when she said she used to be an architect, but gave her a shift cleaning tables and refilling pastries. It was not much, but it was honest work. Every night after her shift, she stayed behind to draw chairs, ceilings, storefronts, anything that still made her feel like she was creating something real. 3 weeks later, a woman in a gray blazer approached her table. "You are Maya Hart, right?" The woman smiled. "I saw your designs online. Someone sent them to me." Maya blinked, confused. "Someone?" "They did not leave a name," the woman said. "But my firm is opening a new branch. We are looking for a creative lead who understands modern sustainability. Your work has heart." Maya's throat tightened. It felt impossible, yet here it was, an open door. She took the job. Within months, her quiet dedication started to draw attention. She worked through nights, studying blueprints, reusing materials from abandoned lots, turning broken things into beauty. The team began to respect her not because of her past name, but because of her ideas. Her project, a community art space built from recycled steel and glass, was featured in a local magazine. The headline read, "From Ashes to Architecture, Maya Hart Builds Hope." She stared at that article for a long time. The name Hart finally felt like her own again. Meanwhile, back in the high-rise Ethan once ruled, cracks were starting to show. His investors were nervous. A charity project had collapsed after a series of public complaints about worker treatment. For the first time, his confidence looked shaken. His assistant brought him the morning news. There, in full color, was Maya's face. The woman who had once stood silently beside him now stood alone, radiant, with a headline that spoke louder than any insult he had ever thrown. Ethan's hand tightened around the paper. The words he had once said echoed in his mind like a curse. "Without me, you would be nothing." He felt the irony cut deep. That night, he found himself outside her studio. The lights were still on inside, warm against the rain. Through the glass, he saw her laughing with 2 interns, explaining how to use light to soften the edges of steel. She looked alive in a way she never had with him. He stood there for a moment, hands in pockets, the drizzle clinging to his hair. He wanted to go in, to say something, anything, but the words failed him. Instead, he turned away. For the first time, Ethan Cole understood what it meant to lose something that money could never buy: respect. Across town, Maya locked up the studio and walked home. She passed a storefront where her reflection appeared faintly in the glass. For a moment, she barely recognized herself. Stronger, sharper, she smiled. The pain of his words had built the foundation she now stood on. And as the night swallowed the city, she whispered to herself, "He said I would be nothing, but nothing is exactly where I built everything." Months passed, and the city began to whisper her name. Maya Hart, the woman who turned broken spaces into breathing art, the woman who built hope out of concrete and glass. Her new project was chosen for the city's annual Innovation Gala, a celebration of design and impact, the same event Ethan Cole had dominated for years. When the letter of invitation arrived, Maya stared at it for a long moment. The memory of that night, the humiliation, the sting of champagne and shame flashed through her mind like lightning. But she no longer felt the burn of it. She only felt calm. She smiled slightly and whispered, "Let the past see what I have become." On the night of the gala, the city glowed under string lights that stretched across the skyline. Maya arrived in a deep blue dress that shimmered like midnight water. It was elegant but simple, chosen not to impress but to represent who she was now. Confident, unshaken, her own creation. Reporters lined the carpet, and cameras flashed, but this time no one called her Mrs. Cole. They called her Architect Hart, and the title fit like a crown she had forged herself. Inside the ballroom, Ethan stood near the stage, surrounded by familiar faces that suddenly felt like strangers. He had received his invitation as a formality. His company was no longer the headline sponsor. When Maya walked in, conversations softened. Every pair of eyes turned. For a moment, even the air seemed to pause. Ethan's gaze followed her across the room, the sound of her heels tapping against marble echoing like punctuation marks in the silence between them. She stopped a few feet away, calm, professional, unflinching. "Ethan," she said quietly. He swallowed hard. "Maya, I heard you were nominated this year," he said, trying to sound steady. "Not this time," she replied. "I am here for the community impact category. It is not about profit. It is about people." Her tone was even, respectful, but every word carried the quiet strength of someone who no longer needed permission to exist. The host's voice filled the room, announcing the winners. For transforming forgotten buildings into centers of life and art, this year's Community Impact Award goes to Maya Hart. Applause erupted, thunderous and genuine. Maya walked to the stage, the spotlight washing over her. Ethan watched as she accepted the award, her hands steady, her smile unforced. "Thank you," she said into the microphone. "Years ago, I was told that without someone else, I would be nothing. But tonight, I stand here to say that every one of us has the power to build something from the ground up, even when no one believes we can. Sometimes, what breaks you is what builds you." The crowd rose to their feet. Even Ethan found himself clapping, though his hands trembled slightly. When the applause faded, he stepped forward through the crowd, reaching her as she stepped off the stage. "Maya, wait," he said softly. She turned, award in hand. "Congratulations," he added. His voice carried something new: humility. "You earned everything you have." "I was wrong." She studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "You were," she said finally, her tone gentle but firm. "But maybe we both learned what success really means." He nodded, unable to find more words. She smiled politely, then walked past him toward the exit, the golden light catching on her hair. Outside, the cool night wrapped around her as reporters called her name, asking for quotes, for photos, for the secret to her success. But all she said was, "Believe in the power of starting over." Later that night, alone in her apartment, she placed the award beside her old sketchbook, the one he had once called a waste of time. Her phone buzzed again, the same unknown number. This time, the message was simple. "I told you the world needed what you build. Congratulations, Maya." She looked at it and smiled, realizing it had been her old professor, the one who had introduced her to Ethan in the first place. Life had come full circle. She whispered, "Thank you," to the quiet room, then turned off the light. The city outside hummed softly, alive with her victory. Somewhere across town, Ethan stood in his office, staring out at the same skyline, the echo of her words still ringing in his mind. For the first time in years, he did not see his reflection in the glass. He saw hers. Weeks after the gala, Maya's life moved faster than she could have imagined. Her company received new offers from investors, who finally saw potential in community-driven design. Her inbox overflowed with messages from universities asking her to speak about resilience and creativity, but she stayed grounded, starting every morning in the same small apartment that had once been her refuge from heartbreak. She would open her sketchbook, sip black coffee, and remind herself that peace was the best revenge. Meanwhile, Ethan's empire was crumbling quietly. Several partners had withdrawn, claiming his arrogance had cost them deals. A leaked report about internal mismanagement sent the company's stock plummeting. For the first time, Ethan found himself standing in front of a boardroom that no longer feared him. His lawyer's voice echoed coldly, "If we cannot rebuild the public image, coal industries will lose its contracts." One board member cleared his throat and said, "There is one name the public still trusts, Maya Hart." Ethan froze. The irony cut through him like glass. That afternoon, he drove to her new office, unsure of what he would say. The glass building stood tall, filled with light and greenery, a living symbol of the values she had built her new life around. Inside, he saw her standing by the window, reviewing blueprints with her team. Her confidence filled the room effortlessly. When their eyes met, she paused, polite but distant. "Ethan," she said calmly, "what brings you here?" He hesitated, every practiced line disappearing from his mind. "I came to ask for help," he admitted, the words tasting bitter and unfamiliar. "My company, it is falling apart. The investors will listen to you. They trust you." Maya crossed her arms, her tone steady. "Why me, Ethan? You have always said I was nothing without you. So what changed?" He exhaled slowly. "Because I was wrong. You were the one who had integrity when I did not. You built something real, something I could never buy." The room fell silent except for the soft hum of the city outside. For the first time, she saw him not as the man who had humiliated her, but as a man finally humbled by his own mistakes. "If I help," she said quietly, "it will not be for you. It will be for the people who depend on your company, the workers, the families." He nodded. "That is all I can ask." They worked together for weeks, not as husband and wife, but as two professionals trying to salvage what could be saved. Late nights in the conference room turned into conversations about choices, regret, and what success really meant. One evening, as they reviewed the final proposal for restructuring, Ethan looked at her and said, "Do you ever think about what we could have been if I had treated you differently?" Maya did not look up from the papers. "I think about what I became because you did not." Her voice was soft, but it landed like truth. The next morning, Cole Industries released a new joint project, an initiative to build affordable community housing using sustainable design. The credit was shared equally between Ethan Cole and Maya Hart. The announcement stunned the media. For weeks, news outlets called it the Redemption Project. During the press conference, Ethan spoke honestly, for the first time in his career. "Everything I built began with arrogance," he said, facing the cameras. "But the person who showed me what real leadership looks like is Maya Hart. Without her, none of this would exist." Maya stood beside him, silent, poised. She did not smile, but her eyes softened slightly. When it was her turn, she simply said, "Sometimes, the best way to prove someone wrong is not through anger, but through creation." The crowd erupted in applause. After the conference, Ethan approached her quietly. "Thank you," he said, "for saving what I almost destroyed." She nodded, adjusting the strap of her bag. "You did not need saving, Ethan. You just needed to remember, you are human." As she walked away, he watched her go with a mix of regret and admiration. For the first time in his life, he felt something unfamiliar peace that did not come from winning, but from letting go. Months later, the world had moved on, but the echoes of what they built together still lingered. The community housing project had become a symbol of second chances, not just for the city, but for everyone who had ever been broken and rebuilt. Maya's name appeared on magazine covers beside phrases like, "The woman who redefined power," and "From contract wife to visionary leader." She smiled at those titles, but never let them define her. Her satisfaction came not from fame, but from watching families move into homes they could finally afford. Every time she saw a light flicker on in one of those apartments, she felt a quiet pride that no applause could match. Ethan, on the other hand, kept his distance. After the press conference, he resigned as CEO and disappeared from the spotlight. Rumors said he moved abroad. Others whispered he was writing a book about leadership and humility. Maya did not ask or check. Some stories, she had learned, were meant to end quietly. One rainy afternoon, she received an invitation in the mail. It was from a publishing house in Boston. Inside was a handwritten note. "To Maya Hart, thank you for reminding me that success means nothing without grace. I hope you will come." It was signed, Ethan Cole. The note was attached to a copy of a new book titled The Cost of Winning. She turned it over. On the back was a dedication. "For M.H., who taught me that building people is greater than building empires." She sat in silence for a long time, tracing the letters with her fingertips. There was no bitterness left, only peace. That evening, she attended the local art fair that her company had sponsored. It was held in one of the very buildings she had helped design. The space glowed with soft golden light, filled with paintings and sculptures made by community artists. On one wall hung a framed sketch, a reproduction of her old drawing from years ago, the one of Ethan standing beside a half-finished tower. Below it, a small plaque read, "The beginning of everything." A man approached her from behind, his voice calm and familiar. "I always wondered why you kept that sketch." She turned slowly. Ethan stood there, older, quieter, dressed simply, his expression free of the pride that once built walls between them. "Because it reminds me of who I was," she said, "and who I never want to be again." He smiled faintly. "Then I am glad you kept it. It reminds me too." They stood in silence for a moment, surrounded by the hum of conversation and the gentle music from a nearby violinist. "I came to say thank you," he said. "Not for helping me fix the company, but for showing me that strength does not have to be loud. It can be silent and kind." Maya nodded. "You are welcome, Ethan. I hope you found what you were looking for." He looked around the gallery, the art, the people, the life she had built. "I think I finally did." As he turned to leave, she called after him softly, "Ethan." He stopped. "For what it is worth, I forgive you." The words hung between them like light breaking through clouds. He nodded once, his eyes glimmering, and walked out into the rain. Maya watched him disappear into the crowd, feeling lighter than she had in years. Later that night, as the fair ended, she locked up the gallery and stood by the window, watching the city glow beneath the drizzle. Her reflection looked back at her calm, proud, and whole. She whispered, "He once said I would be nothing without him. But now I see, I was always something. I just needed to remember." She turned off the lights, the gallery now dark except for the soft glow of one framed piece, the sketch that started it all. It shimmered faintly under the moonlight, as if even the walls remembered how far she had come. Spring arrived quietly that year, and with it came a new chapter in Maya's life. Her company continued to thrive, expanding to new cities, training young designers who came from the same humble beginnings she once knew. Every morning, she still walked to work instead of driving, stopping at the same corner cafe for her black coffee and small talk with the barista, who always asked about her projects. The simplicity of her new life made her grateful. She had learned that peace was not found in luxury, but in knowing her worth. One afternoon, she was invited to speak at a leadership summit in New York City. It was the same kind of event Ethan used to dominate with his charisma and ambition, but this time, it was different. This time, the stage was hers. The conference hall shimmered with soft lights and quiet anticipation as Maya walked on stage in a crisp white suit. The audience, executives, students, entrepreneurs, fell silent. "Years ago," she began, "I stood beside a man who believed my value depended on him. He told me that without him, I would be nothing. I carried that sentence like a stone in my chest for years. But then I realized something. No one has the right to define your worth unless you hand them that power. And when I stopped trying to prove him wrong and started proving myself right, everything changed." The crowd erupted in applause, not out of pity, but admiration. Her words struck a chord with people who had been silenced by doubt. After the session, dozens approached her to thank her for her honesty. Among them was a young woman with shaking hands who said, "Your story gave me courage to leave a toxic job today." Maya smiled, her eyes soft. "Then today is the first day of your freedom," she said. That evening, she returned to her hotel room overlooking Central Park. The city lights glimmered below, alive with stories just like hers. On the desk sat a bouquet of lilies and a note written in familiar handwriting. It read, "You were always destined to shine, even when I tried to dim your light. Congratulations, Maya." She exhaled, a small smile touching her lips. She did not need to guess who it was from. Ethan's words no longer carried pain, only closure. She placed the note in her journal and looked out the window. The rain began to fall softly, tracing silver lines down the glass. She whispered, "Thank you, but I already forgave you." Days later, back in her city, her team surprised her with a new project proposal, a women's mentorship initiative designed to help single mothers learn architecture and design. The program's name made her heart swell. It was called The Worth Project. Maya approved it immediately and decided to lead it herself. In the first session, as she stood before a group of women from different walks of life, she told them, "Your story does not end because someone underestimated you. It begins the moment you decide to rise." Over time, the program grew, touching lives far beyond what she imagined. News outlets began calling her the woman who turned heartbreak into hope. One evening, after a long day at the studio, Maya took a walk through one of the housing communities she had helped design. Children were playing in the courtyard, laughter echoing against the sunset. An elderly woman waved at her, saying, "You built this place, right?" "My grandchildren finally have a home." Maya smiled, her eyes misting. "We built it," she replied. As the sun dipped below the skyline, she sat on a bench watching the light fade and thought about how life had a strange way of healing what once seemed impossible. She reached into her bag and pulled out the old sketchbook that had traveled with her through every chapter. On its last page, she drew a simple line that curved upward, a horizon, a beginning. And beneath it, she wrote, "He said I would be nothing, but I became everything I was meant to be." Then she closed the book, stood up, and walked home, the world around her glowing softly with the quiet power of a woman who had finally built her own destiny. The following autumn, Maya's world seemed softer, fuller, almost peaceful. The Worth Project had grown into something larger than she could have dreamed of. It had become a movement, an alliance of women, architects, teachers, and builders who worked together to create spaces of dignity for those who had been overlooked. Every time she walked into a new site and saw the walls rising, she felt the echo of her old pain turn into quiet gratitude. She no longer chased success, she nurtured it, like something that belonged to everyone, not just her. One afternoon, she received an invitation from the city council for an award ceremony recognizing social innovation. She was nominated once again, but this time, the event was not about glamour or cameras, it was about legacy. The ceremony took place at the same hall where, years before, Ethan had humiliated her in front of the world. As Maya walked up the same marble steps, she felt the ghosts of that night fade behind her. The chandeliers still glittered, but this time, the reflection she saw in them was different. She was no longer the woman standing in someone's shadow, she was the light itself. When she reached the stage, the mayor smiled warmly. "Maya Hart," he said, "you have built not only homes but hope. Your vision has redefined what leadership means for this city." As applause filled the hall, Maya took the microphone and smiled at the crowd. "There was a time," she began, "when I believed strength came from being louder, richer, or more powerful than the person next to you. But real strength, I have learned, is quieter. It is the courage to rebuild when everything collapses. It is choosing kindness when pride tempts you to strike back. And it is believing that you are enough, even when someone tells you otherwise." The room fell silent in awe, before bursting into applause that seemed to go on forever. Later that evening, after the crowd had dispersed, Maya lingered by the stage, running her hand over the smooth edge of the podium where she once stood as someone broken. She felt a presence beside her and turned to see Ethan. He looked different, older, humbler, but there was a calm in his face she had never seen before. "I heard about the Worth Project," he said softly. "It is incredible, Maya." She nodded, surprised but not unsettled by his presence. "Thank you," she replied. "It has been a long road." He took a slow breath. "I did not come to make excuses. I just wanted you to know I am proud of what you have done. You proved me wrong, and you proved me right about one thing: you were never ordinary." Maya smiled faintly. "I stopped needing your approval a long time ago, Ethan, but it means something that you said that." He nodded, his eyes warm. "I know. I just wanted to say it before I leave the city for good." She raised an eyebrow slightly. "Where will you go?" "I do not know yet," he said with a quiet laugh. "Somewhere I can build something that matters this time. Maybe a small school, maybe a foundation. I am not sure. But I know I want to start by doing good, not by owning it." For the first time, Maya felt no tension, no resentment, only a kind of gentle closure. "I hope you find peace," she said. "You deserve that too." He gave a small, grateful smile. "So do you." As he walked away, Maya watched him go, his figure fading into the golden light of the hallway. She turned back toward the empty stage, her reflection shimmering in the polished floor. The past and the present stood side by side for one quiet heartbeat, then merged into something new. Outside, the city was alive with the hum of possibility. She stepped into the night, her heels clicking against the pavement, the same rhythm that once carried her out of this hall in shame now echoing with quiet triumph. She whispered to herself, "He said without him I would be nothing, but I became something more than he could ever imagine." The wind carried her words away like a promise, and somewhere beyond the city lights, a new chapter waited to begin. Winter returned, crisp and silver, wrapping the city in a quiet calm. Maya had learned to love this season. It reminded her of beginnings, of cold nights that once felt endless but now carried warmth in their stillness. The Worth Project had expanded beyond the city, reaching small towns and rural communities across the country. Everywhere it went, people recognized her face, not as the wife of a millionaire but as the architect of change. Her days were long but meaningful, filled with design meetings, mentoring sessions, and interviews she never imagined she would give. Yet, beneath the success, she stayed grounded, guided by the same mantra she had written in her old sketchbook: "Build, do not boast." One afternoon, as snow drifted past her office window, her assistant entered with a small box wrapped in brown paper. "It came with no sender's name," the assistant said. Maya opened it carefully. Inside was a wooden model of a house, hand-carved, intricate but humble. On the bottom, engraved in small letters, were the words, "For the woman who taught me how to rebuild." She smiled softly, recognizing Ethan's handwriting. It was not a grand gesture, just a quiet symbol of gratitude. She placed the model on her desk beside the award she had won months earlier. For a long time, she stared at the two objects, one representing redemption, the other forgiveness, and realized they now belonged together. Weeks later, Maya was invited to speak at the opening of a new educational center in a coastal town, one of the latest projects funded by the Worth Foundation. The irony was not lost on her. The foundation had been co-created by an anonymous donor who turned out to be Ethan himself. When she discovered that, she felt no anger, only respect. They had built something together again, but this time, it was out of integrity, not pride. At the ceremony, surrounded by children and families, Maya gave her speech under a wide blue sky. "The most beautiful structures," she said, "are not the ones that rise the highest, but the ones that stand through storms. We all have storms inside us, but we can choose what to build from them." Applause filled the air, and for a moment, she saw Ethan standing at the edge of the crowd, his coat dusted with snow, clapping quietly. Their eyes met across the distance. He did not approach, and she did not call him over. They simply exchanged a silent understanding, two people who had walked through fire and emerged whole. After the event, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Maya wandered down to the shoreline. The sea breeze tangled her hair, and the sound of the waves was steady, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. She thought of how far she had come from the girl who once believed she was small to the woman who had learned she could move mountains by being kind. Her phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from an unknown number again, but she knew who it was. It read, "Thank you for keeping your promise to build, to forgive, to rise." She typed back only 3 words. "We both did." Then she slipped her phone into her coat pocket and looked out at the horizon, where the ocean met the fading light. That night, as she returned to her hotel room, she found herself sketching again, the way she used to when everything was uncertain. The lines came easily now, flowing with purpose. She drew a bridge strong, simple, connecting 2 shores. Beneath it, she wrote, "Some bridges are not meant to be burned. They are meant to be rebuilt, stronger than before." She closed her sketchbook and exhaled, feeling a peace so complete it almost frightened her. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and endless, blanketing the world like a promise of renewal. For Maya Hart, life had finally come full circle, and this time, she knew she had written every line of her own story. Spring melted slowly into summer, and the city seemed to bloom alongside Maya's life. The Worth Foundation had just celebrated its 3rd anniversary, and she was standing at the center of a new milestone, the grand opening of the Hart Center for Design and Renewal, a space dedicated to mentoring young women in architecture, art, and leadership. The glass building stood tall beside the river, reflecting sunlight like liquid gold. Inside, walls were lined with sketches from students she had taught, and a small exhibit displayed the story of her journey, the failed beginnings, the contract marriage, the humiliation, and the rise that followed. She stood there quietly before the display, her reflection merging with the timeline behind the glass. A group of students approached her shyly. "Miss Hart, what made you keep going when things got so hard?" one girl asked. Maya smiled gently, "Because I wanted to prove that failure is not the end. It is a foundation. You can build something beautiful on top of what tried to destroy you." They nodded, their faces lighting up with admiration. That afternoon, the center filled with laughter, music, and speeches from people whose lives had been touched by her work. Near the end of the ceremony, the host announced a surprise guest speaker. Maya turned toward the stage, her breath catching for a moment. Ethan walked up calmly, holding a small box in his hand. The room quieted. "I was not supposed to be here tonight," he began, his voice steady but full of emotion. "But this building, this vision, would not exist without the heart behind it, no pun intended." The crowd chuckled softly. "There was a time when I thought power meant control. I was wrong. Real power is grace, and Maya Hart showed me that. She built something that outlasts pride, wealth, and even failure, and I am honored to have been a small part of that story." He opened the box and revealed a framed blueprint, a replica of the first home design they had ever worked on together, years ago. Across the top was inscribed, "Built from ashes." Maya's eyes glistened. She took the frame, her hand brushing his. "Thank you," she said quietly. This means more than you know. He smiled faintly. I do know. There was no need for more words. It was not a reconciliation, but a moment of mutual respect between two people who had both rebuilt themselves from ruin. Later that evening, after the crowd had gone, Maya walked alone through the halls of the new center. The lights were dim, the river shimmered outside, and the soft hum of the city filled the silence. She paused at a large window overlooking the skyline, the same city where her story had begun. It no longer looked intimidating. It looked alive, welcoming, full of possibility. She took out her sketchbook, the same one she had carried all those years, and turned to its final page. There she drew one last design, a simple heart intertwined with the outline of a home. Beneath it, she wrote, "Home is not where someone saves you, it is where you save yourself." Closing the book, she exhaled deeply, feeling the weight of every lesson she had learned. Outside, a soft breeze carried the scent of rain and jasmine through the open doors. Maya stepped out onto the terrace, her dress fluttering in the wind, the city lights glowing like stars below. A reporter waiting by the exit called out, "Miss Hart, one last question. What would you say to the man who once told you that you would be nothing without him?" She paused, a serene smile spreading across her face. "I would say thank you," she replied, "because without those words, I might have never discovered who I truly am." With that, she walked down the steps into the warm night air, the sound of her heels fading into the hum of the city. Her voice echoed softly in the distance. "He said I would be nothing, but I became everything I was meant to be." And as the lights of the Heart Center glowed behind her, the story of Maya Hart ended not with revenge, but with grace, forgiveness, and the quiet power of a woman who finally built her own forever.